Here's the story of my first arrest, February of 2020, a month before the COVID outbreak shut the city down. I was living in Asheville, North Carolina, hippie, progressive, mountain town, full of buskers and artists and affluent retirees who made the strategic choice that they could deal with the hippies and the gays for the good life in the mountains in such a cool, funky town. I have a long history of befriending homeless people, including in the seniors building I was living in. My best friend there had been homeless most of her life, and then in that building for 10 years, and Mexican herself, and we became deep friends. And she taught me a lot about the homeless life. And then I took in a church friend who was living out of his car and hiding it from people, but I figured out what was going on. He stayed for 2 months. We became really good buds, and he got me out hiking in the mountains, which I had not been doing and putting off until I had a girlfriend to go do it with. So that was great. And he got on his feet and got an apartment through an agency and did really well. He bounced back super. And then I took in a stranger, a guy I met on his second day in Asheville, big strapping black guy, brilliant blues musician. I heard him playing on the street and ran to, who is this guy? Because he's genuinely brilliant. It was his second day there after leaving New Orleans for reasons that he never disclosed. He's a big sweetheart of a guy, but in his teenage years, his uncle had come back from the war, I guess from, I don't know, a Navy, and diagnosed his teenage nephew as a coward. And he was kind of at that point. So taught him how to fight really well, really well. And at this point, other street people would try to set up situations to watch him fight because he was legendary, but he hated it. Big-hearted guy, traumatized from all the fighting. He wanted desperately to never have another fight. Well, in my seniors building, the old people who were almost all white loved him because he was so gentle and sweet and polite. But one racist hated him and finally just baited him too much by calling him boy twice. And before Eric could do what he knew how to do and felt like he had to do, he was insistent on it, his pride relied on it, the one black man who lived in the building, a 70-ish, great black man, Larry Williams, saw what was going on, intervened, broke it up, and Eric showed up in my place so enraged and humiliated. And I was just desperate to come up with something to make him not feel so much pain. And I swear it was the voice for God. Some of you will say, no, God would not have told you to beat that guy up. But I said to Eric, I said, I got it, Eric. I know it's what has to happen. And Eric says, yeah, what are we going to do? No, not we, man. I got this one. What are you going to do? I'm going to beat him up. And we both laughed. And Eric, because I'm not built like a fighter. I was like in my 70s. And Eric says, when was the last time you beat anybody up? And I said, well, not in this lifetime. But I got a good feeling about this. And I did. I got very excited about it. Only once, just before the guy came home from work and I was waiting to corner him in the parking lot, did I get scared. And I'm a performance poet, and one of my mantras is anxiety plus breath equals excitement. I took a deep breath and got excited again and stalked him in the parking lot. Said, Alan, this is before George Floyd's killing. Alan, it's 2020. You can't pull that shit anymore. Well, I'm not a fighter, and he was not a fighter. When the cops arrived and took my story after they had interviewed him, I said, there's a nothing fight. Two guys who didn't know how to fight. Nobody landed one. Nobody went down. It was terrible. And this nice lady cop says, he says you hit him. And he's got a red mark on his forehead. And I said, really? She says, don't get excited. He's pressing charges. And I said, well, I thought there'd probably be charges, but if I landed one, Eric was watching out the 5th floor window, he won't have to do anything. If nothing happened, he might still feel like he had to finish it. And he was on probation for beating a guy up. So he'd have been creamed. He'd have ended up with hard time. So on the way to the station house, that same cop asked me, so let me get this straight. You hit that guy so that your black friend wouldn't, because you figured the justice system would go easier on you. And I said, yeah. She said, awesome. Good work. Nobody's going to hold you for that in this town. And in that progressive town, they didn't. And finally, the guy didn't show up for court, and it was all dropped. But I was booked and spent 8 hours in this big holding room with a whole bunch of other guys, none of whom seemed like hardened criminals to me. And I'm so good with men that at one point I needed something and said to one of the officers, hey, bud. And I said, I'm sorry, officer, I need water. So that was not a bad experience. And I actually, it was a graduation for me because I had been a coward as a teenager. The one other time I remember being bullied, I remember just being scared and letting the guy bully me. So this was a coming of age for me. The next day I was driving down the street and went, yes, I'm a fighter. And when one of the old biddies and the noted Buddhist in the building said, well, I hope you got that out of your system, I said, you know, I think the next time will be easier. and it was. There's never been a next time because somehow I had a major spiritual experience right before that. And if a guy tries to push me around, which up in Appalachia, occasionally they did, although most of the guys out in Appalachia were sweethearts. But in other situations, if a guy tries to push me around, he gets something from me he doesn't expect, and they always back down. Everyone, nobody's called my bluff yet. So it was a real healing, positive experience for me. So that's number one. On to number two, new video.